gozaimasu, fellow members of the IASBS and friends. It is a great honor for me to be here to present the keynote address of the 20th conference of the International Association of Shin Buddhist Studies. Since I don't consider myself especially knowledgeable about Shin Buddhism, I never thought that I would be called upon to fulfill this great role. So I'm extremely happy and honored to be here to present some of my thoughts with you today. I will be reading my paper, as Dr. Nage said. The paper is available on Google. And for those of you who don't have the paper, I gave some of the essential points of my talk on this screen. And the things on the left-hand side cannot be erased because it might cause problems with the internet, so it will be sort of kakowarui, but it'll be like this. But before I begin, I would like to say a few words in memory of Dr. Hisao Inagaki. I understand that this organization, the organizers of this conference, originally intended to have a panel in honor of him instead of a run-of-the-mill keynote address. So I think it's appropriate for me to say a few words and begin by reminding ourselves of his groundbreaking role in spreading Shin Buddhist studies around the globe, both as a scholar and as a former president of the IASBS. Actually, although I have not been a regular participant in the IASBS conferences, I am proud to say that I attended the very first meeting of this association when it was held at the Fukakusa campus. And that was when I was still a postdoc at Otani University. And it was through this association that I got acquainted with Inagaki Sensei. He was always a kind of a mentor to me, and he always sent me all of his translations as they were published. Although I must confess that I don't always agree with his translations, I have profited greatly from these works, and they have played an important role in making Pure Land Buddhism well known outside of Japan. Dr. Inagaki was undoubtedly one of the great pioneers of Shin Buddhist studies in the English-speaking world, and we are all greatly indebted to his work. So, turning now to my address, today I would like to talk about a text that has been the main focus of my research for the past decade or two, which is Genshin's Ōjōyōshū. As all of you know, the Ōjōyōshū is one of the most important texts of Japanese Buddhism, and the famous description of the hills found in it still excite the imagination of many people, young and old. I have to show you this picture. I may just remind you that there was a popular anime about a cool and unflappable bureaucrat in hell called Hozuki no Reitetsu, based loosely on the Ōjōyōshū a couple of years ago. And that is Hozuki-san, and in the middle is the buffoon, who is Emma Taiyo. But more importantly, the Ōjōyōshū is the text that has laid the foundation for the development of Pure Land Buddhism in Japan. So it is no wonder that Shinran counted Genshin as one of the 7 patriarchs of Shin Buddhism. In 2017, which coincidentally was the 1000th anniversary of Genshin's death, I published a book in which I discussed the historical background and main ideas of the Ōjōyōshū. However, there were a number of interesting issues that I was unable to take up in this book. So today, I would like to touch upon some of these ideas, not only because I think that they are important for getting a holistic understanding of the Ōjōyōshū, but also because I think that they shed some interesting light on the kind of person that Genshin himself was. So, for the next hour or so, I would like to discuss very briefly the following 3 points. And they are, first, the place of esoteric Buddhism in the Ōjōyōshū, and secondly, how the text responds to the concerns of people who are afraid that they are incapable of fulfilling the demands that the Pure Land path makes on them. And finally, Genshin's views concerning greedy and precept-breaking monks. And time constraints will probably not allow me to pick up the 3rd topic, but that's okay because there are no greedy precept-breaking monks in this room. So you're all right. So, the first point. The first issue that I would like to address concerns Genshin's understanding of the relationship between Pure Land Buddhism and esoteric Buddhism. I first began thinking about this during my conversations with Aaron Prophet when he was doing his PhD research in Japan at Otani University and also at Oyasan University. As you all probably know, Prophet published a book entitled Esoteric Pure Land Buddhism from the University of Hawaii Press last year. And in it, he argues that Pure Land Buddhism and esoteric Buddhism should not be seen as 2 separate streams of thought that are inherently opposed to each other. Rather, he says, Amida Buddha and the practices centered on this Buddha was an integral part of esoteric Buddhism from the very beginning. And Prophet calls this form of esoteric Buddhism the esoteric Pure Land Buddhism. He further argues that there are numerous examples of monks in Japan, such as Yokan or Eikan and Chinkai. They both were scholar monks and esoteric practitioners at the Todaiji. And these monks are usually pigeonholed as Pure Land monks, but they were simultaneously unswerving esoteric practitioners as well. In other words, they fit the category that Prophet calls the esoteric Pure Land Buddhism. So in our conversations between myself and Aaron, he argued that Genshin was another such esoteric Pure Land monk. But I must note that when he published his book, all references to Genshin had disappeared from it. Originally, I was pretty skeptical about seeing esoteric Buddhism as a major element of Genshin's Pure Land worldview. But I have come to think otherwise. After all, esoteric Buddhism was a prominent feature of the Japanese Tendai school, and even Genshin himself accepts that birth in the Pure Land can be achieved by relying on esoteric Dharanies. However, although Genshin accepted that birth in the Pure Land can be attained through esoteric practices, I do not think that it is accurate to categorize him as an esoteric Pure Land monk. To be more specific, I believe that his purpose in writing the Ōjōyōshū was not to advocate an esoteric path to birth in the Pure Land, but rather to outline an alternative, non-esoteric Pure Land path, one that is based on exoteric Pure Land sutras, as well as the teachings of Dao Chuo, Shan Dao, Waigang, and his own Tendai and Tendai doctrinal and meditational systems. So, how does Genshin situate esoteric Buddhism in the Ōjōyōshū? So how does Genshin situate esoteric Buddhism in the Ōjōyōshū? Genshin wrote this text to argue that birth in the Pure Land can be attained through the Nembutsu. But it is also significant that there are very few references to esoteric Buddhism in the Ōjōyōshū. At the end of this treatise, he famously enumerates 17 texts, beginning with the Sutra of Immeasurable Life and the Contemplation Sutra, which he considers to be the most relevant works for Pure Land practice. However, none of them is a work associated with esoteric Buddhism. So it may be said that references to esoteric Buddhism are conspicuous by their absence in the Pure Land system described in the Ōjōyōshū. But it's also important to note that Genshin does, in fact, refer to esoteric texts and practices several times in the Ōjōyōshū. Perhaps the most remarkable is this passage, found at the beginning of chapter 9, entitled Clarification of the Various Practices for Birth. And in this chapter, Genshin argues that a number of practices other than the Nembutsu allows us to be born in the Pure Land. And he enumerates the following practices as being conducive to birth in Amida's realm. And these are the texts. First, Samantabhadra's vows in the 40-roll Garland Sutra. Second, the 3,000 Buddha Name Sutras, the Sanzenbutsu Nyokyo. The no letter Jewel Casket Sutra, the Mushiku Kyokyo. The Lotus Sutra and various Mahayana texts. And 5, the spell of Mahapratisara, the Zuigu Dharani. The Dharani for the Honorable One of the Buddha Peak, the Bucho-Sonsho Dharani. The unpolluted pure light Dharani, the Mukujoko Dharani. The wish-fulfilling wheel Dharani, the Nuiding Dharani. Aryatara Dharani, the Arirokika Dharani. The unerring lasso Dharani, the Fuku Tensaku Dharani. The mantra of light, Komyo Shinru. The Amida Dharani. And finally, the 13th, the Dharani Dharani for attaining birth in the Pure Land that Nagarjuna received in a dream. And after listing these texts, Genshin concludes, these exoteric and esoteric Mahayana texts and spells hold that the act of accepting, keeping, reading, and reciting them constitutes the practice for gaining birth in the land of supremeness. So here, along with Mahayana sutras like the Lotus Sutra, Genshin enumerates 13 dharanis, whose recitation he claims allows one to be born in the Pure Land. Hence, it is evident that Genshin did not reject the recitation of dharanis as an effective means for assuring birth in the Pure Land. And in a similar vein, in chapter chapter 3 of the Ōjōyōshū, entitled Proofs for the Land of Supreme Bliss, Genshin states that there is, and I quote, an incalculable number of passages in various exoteric and esoteric teachings encouraging us to exclusively seek the land of supreme bliss, end of quote. And he provides a similar but slightly longer list of non-Nembutsu texts and practices, including the recitation of the Otani, that he deems conducive to Pure Land birth. So clearly, Genshin believed that esoteric practices, esoteric Dharanis, can help us achieve birth in the Pure Land. Now here, I would like to digress a bit and remind you that the exclusive devotion to Pure Land practice, the Nembutsu, was not the norm until Honen brought about a paradigm change in Japanese religion by advocating his exclusive Nembutsu, or the Senju Nembutsu movement. Before Honen, many monks engaged in non-Pure Land practices, including esoteric practices, in conjunction with the Nembutsu. Many of these can be characterized as followers of what Aaron called esoteric Pure Land Buddhism. And these monks practiced devotion to Amida Buddha in the context of their esoteric faith. Such esoteric Pure Land monks were found not only in the Shingon lineages, but also in the Tendai school as well. Although the evidence is somewhat meager, there are multiple examples of Tendai monks who sought birth in the Pure Land while simultaneously dedicating themselves to esoteric practices. An early example of such Tendai monk is Ennin, the third Tendai Zasu, or the abbot of Enryakushi. As is well known, he traveled to China and brought back esoteric teachings to Mount Hiei. And also significantly, he also was the first person to introduce the Nembutsu to his school. The manner in which Amida Buddha was incorporated in his esoteric practice is aptly illustrated by the description of his final hours, which is found in his biography, the Chikaku Daishiten. And according to this biography, when his end was approaching, Ennin faced west, the direction of the Pure Land, and with palms placed together in gassho, recited Kimyo Chorai Midashugaku, or I take refuge in and venerate Amida, who possesses the knowledge of all modes of existence. In addition, he had his disciples recite the names of various Buddhas and Bodhisattvas 100 times each, beginning with Mahavairochana and followed by Shakyamuni, Amida, Samantabhadra, Manjushri, Kandon, and Maitreya. After a few hours, he passed away lying on his right side with his head pointing north while making mudras and reciting mantras. So, although it seems clear that Ennin sought birth in Amida's Pure Land on his deathbed, it also seems apparent from this that his devotion to Amida is embedded in a wider esoteric Buddhist discourse that constituted his spiritual universe. There are other examples of Tendai monks belonging to esoteric lineages who practiced seeking birth in the Pure Land. They include such monks as Ennin's disciple So. He's the one that started the Kaihokyo practice of Mount Hiei. And So Otani, quote, facing west, reciting the name of Amida Buddha. There's also Zomyo, a disciple of the esoteric master Enchin, who also died peacefully while remaining mindful of Amida. And finally, there's Ensho, who is said to have recited the Sonsho Dharani 100 times each night, and had his disciples conduct an uninterrupted Ninbutsu, the Fudan Ninbutsu, on his deathbed. Unfortunately, in the case of these three monks, So, Zomyo, and Sho, we are not really sure how their devotion to Amida Buddha is integrated into their esoteric practices. Of course, there's no question that they did not see them as being mutually exclusive, but how exactly was their Amida faith related to their esoteric practices? In other words, did they see their faith in Amida as being distinct from their esoteric practices, as something that was undertaken alongside their esoteric practices? Or did they understand it as being an integral aspect of their esoteric worldview? We really cannot be sure. However, the esoteric character of his Pure Land practice is clear in the case of Shinkaku, who lived around the same time as Genshin. Shinkaku was the fourth son of the renowned poet Fujiwara no Atsutada, and Shinkaku originally served in court, but later he became a Tendai monk on Mount Hiei and received transmission of both the moon and diamond mandalas, and he was also instructed in the Amida Kuyo and practiced it 3 times a day throughout his life. The fact that Shinkaku practiced the Amida Kuyo is, I think, quite significant. This ritual, which is also known simply as the Amida Ho, refers to the complex Amida visualization practice based on the Muryo-ju Yorai Kangyo Kuyo Giki. And as Prophet has noted, this text is, I quote his words, arguably one of the most influential esoteric Pure Land texts in East Asia. And this ritual text also describes the well-known fundamental dharani of Amida Buddha, which, when recited 10,000 times, is said to eliminate all of one's past evil karma and ensure one's birth in the Pure Land at the highest level of the highest grade. And here you see an influence of the Contemplation Sutra. Shinkaku's example shows that the premier esoteric Amida visualization practice was being undertaken on Mount Hiei in Genshin's age, suggesting strongly that the so-called esoteric Pure Land Buddhism had indeed taken root within the Tendai school by this time. So to repeat, although the evidence is somewhat sketchy, there were presumably a number of Tendai monks before and around Genshin's time who were undertaking practices directed towards Amida Buddha in the context of their esoteric faith. And significantly, it is evident that at least one monk, Shinkaku, was practicing the Amida Kuyo-ho, an esoteric Amida visualization practice for the specific purpose of attaining birth in the Pure Land. However, to return to the point that I made earlier in this paper, despite the prevalence of esoteric teachings on Mount Hiei, there is very little reference to it in the Ōjōyōshū. And as a matter of fact, it even seems that Genshin consciously minimized references to esoteric teachings in his work. And the question is why? I don't have the answer to that. But one possible reason for it may be the fact, and it may be found in the following quotation on the screen, taken from the section in the Ōjōyōshū describing the method of giving praise to Amida Buddha. There, Genshin makes the following observation. The benefits of praising the Buddha described in the Shingon teachings Genshin is stating that since the Shingon method for praising Amida is extremely profound, it should not be revealed to the uninitiated, and for this reason will not be taken up in the Ōjōyōshū. In making this statement, Genshin is underscoring the point that the esoteric teachings are categorically different from non-esoteric teachings. And the reason why Genshin draws such a clear line between the two is not simply to differentiate between them. More importantly, I think, and this is my hypothesis, I think he is using this distinction as a means to exclude the former, that is to say, the esoteric teachings, from his Pure Land system. In other words, Genshin was trying to develop a Pure Land system that is clearly demarcated from what Prophet calls the esoteric Pure Land Buddhism. But why would Genshin want to construct a Pure Land system independent of the so-called esoteric Pure Land Buddhism? Although this is just my hypothesis, there may have been both historical, maybe institutional, and personal reasons for this. Going with the historical reason first, in the generation before Genshin, Pure Land teachings were spreading rapidly among the people of Japan at large, including both the nobility and the commoners. And this was especially the case in the city of Kyoto, where the monk Koya was actively promoting the Nembutsu. Presumably, Genshin's purpose in writing the Ōjōyōshū was to provide a clear and authoritative guide for the growing number of people who were being drawn to the Pure Land faith in his time. But in presenting his Pure Land system, he may have felt it inappropriate to refer to esoteric Buddhist teachings, since it consisted of secret lore that cannot be transmitted to the uninitiated. Instead, he constructed his system on the basis of the non-esoteric Pure Land tradition of Daojo, Shandao, Waigan, that were accessible to the general public, even though esoteric Pure Land practices were firmly established on Mount Hiei. And Genshin's work in this regard was facilitated by the fact that non-esoteric Pure Land texts had already been transmitted to Japan by the Nara period, and Tendai monks in the generation before Genshin had taken the first tentative steps in creating a Pure Land discourse based on them. Another reason may have been more personal. Although his master Ryogen was himself an accomplished esoteric ritualist, as far as we can tell, Genshin never received any esoteric transmission. He was a scholastic monk who immersed himself in Tendai and other exoteric teachings, and his fame rested on his accomplishments in the doctrinal debates that were being conducted on these topics. So this background may also contribute to the fact that he seldom refers to esoteric Buddhism in the Ōjōyōshū. This is something that I'm still thinking about, so if you have any comments, I would be very happy to hear them. All right, now I would like to go on to the second topic that I will take up today. My hypothesis that Genshin was trying to outline a Pure Land path that is open to everyone, ordinary practitioners as well as accomplished elites, is connected to the second point I wish to take up in this lecture, which is Genshin's concern for people who wish to practice the Pure Land path, but are afraid that they are incapable of fulfilling all the demands that it places on them. And who has not had this? mentioned earlier, Genshin's primary aim in composing the Ōjōyōshū was to show that birth in Amida's Pure Land is made possible by practicing the Nembutsu. However, in the course of fleshing out his central message, he also takes up a wide range of problems related to Pure Land practice. One such problem concerns the various difficulties that common unenlightened beings, Wonbu face when they attempt to undertake their practices. Although the Pure Land path claims to provide an easy path to awakening that is open to everyone, monastics as well as lay people, the path that it outlines, at least as it is envisioned by Genshin, is still quite demanding, leading many people to question whether they will be able to fulfill all that is required of them. In the Ōjōyōshū, Genshin frequently addresses the worries of such people, showing that he was quite sympathetic to the concerns of ordinary practitioners who have yet to advance very far along the path to awakening. And here I'm going to skip to page 9, if you have your handout, and I'll start from the very last paragraph there. Because he recognizes that Pure Land teachings are directed towards ordinary people as well as accomplished practitioners, Genshin is careful not to neglect the problems that the former type of people, the ordinary people, face when undertaking their spiritual exercises. In fact, the Ōjōyōshū is replete with practical, down-to-earth nuggets of advice for neophytes and lay practitioners who find it difficult to carry out their practices in the ideal proscribed manner. And it's no exaggeration to say that the question of how ordinary Nembutsu practitioners can engage in their practices is one of the hidden themes that runs throughout the Ōjōyōshū. One problem that troubles many practitioners is what they should do when they are distracted and cannot concentrate their thoughts on Amida Buddha. Ideally, according to Genshin, our thoughts should be focused on Amida at all times. But we are continually confronted with situations that prevent us from doing so. What should we do under such circumstances? To this, Genshin gives the following answer. It's a little long, but let me quote it in full because I think it's quite interesting. And the question, it's not in the handout, but it's on the screen. The question is, what should practitioners do when they are distracted and cannot concentrate their thoughts on Amida Buddha? And the answer is like this. Answer, if they cannot straight away remain mindful of the Buddha, and that is my translation of Butsu Nenzuru, by the way, they should endeavor to arouse the mind to remain mindful of the Buddha even while dealing with the various things that they are occupied with. That is to say, when playing or chatting, they should vow to engage in such pleasant activities in the heavenly being, with the heavenly beings and the multitude of sages in the jewel pools and jewel groves in the realm of supreme bliss. When in suffering and despair, they should vow to free themselves along with various sentient beings from suffering and gain birth at the land of supreme bliss. When they come face to face with high-ranking and virtuous people, they should vow to be born in the Pure Land and serve the world-honored one in the same way. It continues. When they see those who are vulgar and lowly, they should vow to be born in the Pure Land to benefit and give pleasure to those who have been orphaned and are alone. Whenever they see human beings or animals, they should arouse this thought: may I attain birth in the country of peace and bliss with these sentient beings. When eating or drinking, they should vow to receive the exquisite food that appears spontaneously in the land of sweetness. As for their clothing and beddings, whatever they do while walking, standing, sitting, and lying down, things that go against their wishes and things that go as they wish, with regard to all of these things, they should do the same. In other words, when practitioners cannot focus their mind on Amida because they are distracted by the events that are taking place in their daily lives, they should take advantage of these opportunities to reflect on Amida and the pleasures of the Pure Land. Just because we are surrounded by worldly matters, Genshin implies, it does not mean that we cannot engage in religious practice. In his view, we can turn everything that we encounter in this world into opportunities for conducting the Emeritus. Genshin makes a similar point when dealing more specifically with how lay people who cannot devote themselves entirely to religious life should conduct themselves. For such people, Genshin advises, I quote, if people of the world find it difficult to cast aside their prescribed worldly duties, they should constantly fix their thoughts on the West and, with a sincere mind, remain mindful of the Buddha. In other words, if lay people must work at their trades and professions to maintain their livelihood, Genshin suggests that they should practice Nembuzu even while conducting their businesses. Once again, his point is that secular occupations do not obstruct one's religious vocation. In both of the quotations that I have given, Genshin's point is that we should focus our mind on Amida and the Pure Land in whatever situation we find ourselves. This, he asserts, is the essence of the Nembuzu practice. He suggests that the mental attitude with which we practice the Nembuzu plays a crucial role in determining its spiritual efficacy. And indeed, this point is underscored in Genshin's discussion of the four extensive vows and the Shikuzegan, to which we will now turn. In the Ōjōyōshū, Genshin stresses the need to arouse the aspiration for awakening, bodhicitta, bodaishin, in order to attain birth in the Pure Land. He further continues that one's aspiration for awakening takes concrete form in one's vow, which is most often expressed in the form of the Bodhisattva's four extensive vows. There are several different versions of these vows, each slightly different in phrasing from one another, but as quoted by Genshin, they are as follows. Sentient beings, limitless in number, I vow to ferry over. Afflictions, limitless in number, I vow to eradicate. Dharma gates, which are inexhaustible, I vow to comprehend. And complete supreme awakening, I vow to realize. And it is in the context of discussing these vows that Genshin takes up the importance of the mental attitude with which one engages in one's practice. He begins with this rhetorical question. Common beings, Bonbu, cannot bear to practice with diligence. Why should they arouse the extensive vows in vain? In other words, the practices required of those who arouse the four extensive vows are so demanding and require so much effort and perseverance that ordinary beings cannot possibly fulfill them. Since they are incapable of carrying through their vows, is it not better for them simply to admit their inability to practice the Buddhist path and refrain from arousing the vows at all? To this question, Genshin answers as follows. Answer. Even if they cannot bear to practice with diligence, they should still arouse the compassionate vows. The benefits of arousing them are innumerable. Devadatta recited 60,000 sets of sutras, but was not exempt from falling into Naraka or hell. Maitreya set forth his compassionate vow for just an instant and suddenly gave birth in Tushta heaven. Therefore, it can be known that the difference between rising and falling within the cycle of birth and death depends on one's aspiration and not on one's practice. Here, Genshin emphasizes that we should arouse our vows and embark on our practices even if we are uncertain if we can fulfill them completely. This is because it is the attitude with which we engage in our practice and not necessarily the practice itself that is ultimately the most important factor in determining the rewards that one gains. When accompanied by a heartfelt desire to attain awakening, Genshin believes, even small acts of goodness can have consequences that are all out of proportion with the act itself. As illustration, Genshin refers to the story of Maitreya, which appears in the Zōkyō and Avarana collection. And according to this story, Maitreya made a vow just once to take on all the suffering of sentient beings in their place and was born in Tushta heaven. This shows how a seemingly minor action can result in substantive rewards if it is done with a virtuous intention. The converse is also true as well. Even though Devadatta recited 60,000 sets of sutras, the large amount of merits that he generated could not prevent him from falling into hell, thanks to the malicious intention that he harbored against the Buddha. So in sum, Genshin believes that it is never useless to arouse the extensive vows, since even seemingly insignificant acts of merits can result in awakening if they are supported by one's vows. This is true if one only calls out, "I take refuge in the Buddha" once, or gives food as alms to someone in need of food, even once. Based on such observations, Genshin argues that one should arouse the four extensive vows even if one is unsure of one's ability to fulfill them. In this way, Genshin emphasizes the importance of the mental attitude with which one undertakes one's practice, even to the point of claiming that it is more important than the act itself. Let me end my talk by discussing one other question concerning Genshin's interpretation of how ordinary practitioners should behave when the Buddha's teachings make seemingly inordinate demands on them. This concerns the very practical problem of charity, or almsgiving. Charity is, of course, one of the 6 perfections, and there are many passages in the sutras stressing the need for bodhisattvas to perform seemingly extreme acts of charity as part of their quest for awakening. To cite one famous example, at the beginning of the Devadatta chapter in the Lotus Sutra, it says that when he was a king in a previous lifetime, Shakyamuni gave away elephants, horses, the 7 jewels, realms, walled cities, wife, children, slaves, servants, head, eyes, marrow, trunk, flesh, arms, and legs in order to attain Buddha. Genshin also affirms the need to perform selfless acts of charities in order to achieve awakening, right? The sutra. But such heroic acts of altruism are, practically speaking, impossible for ordinary people to perform, whether they be monastics or lay people. Hence the following question. Question. Since common beings do not have the means to do so, they are unable to give things away in charity, even if they want to give them away. Or else, they are poor. What expedient devices are there to help make their minds conform to the principle? In other words, to follow the truth. And to this, Genshin answers by citing passages from several sutras. The first of which is from the Ratnakutra Sutra, the Hoshakusho. And the sutra states, in practicing charity in this way, if bodhisattvas lack the means and are unable to practice or to cast aside their wealth, they should deliberate as follows. I will strive with vigor even more diligently, or practice harder and harder, and gradually, from time to time, eliminate and remove the pollutions of avarice, kenton, and stinginess. Inshaku. I will strive with vigor, even more diligently, and gradually, from time to time, practice casting away my wealth and offering it to others, constantly increasing and broadening my desire to engage in charity. Genshin's argument here is that some people have simply not reached a state of spiritual development where they can commit themselves to a life of selfless charity. Such people, he maintains, should resolve to practice even more diligently to free themselves from thoughts of avarice and stinginess until they can gradually become capable of undertaking charity in the prescribed manner. Again, this is a common sense approach that tries not to set absolute standards, but recognizes that different people have different spiritual abilities, and that it is enough for each person to do just what he or she is capable of doing. Doing what you can do is the important thing. Another interesting solution to this problem of charity is found in the following verses that Genshin quotes from the Sutra on Cause and Effects of Past and Present, the Kako Kenzai Gakyo. And the verse says, if there are people in abject poverty who have no wealth to give as charity, they should, when seeing another person perform acts of charity, rejoice in that person's action. The merits they receive the merits they receive as the reward for rejoicing is equal to and no different from that gained from the act of charity itself. In citing this passage, Genshin recognizes that some people are so poor that they have no material possessions to give away as alms. For such people, he recommends that they should simply rejoice when they see other people perform acts of charity. The rewards they gain, Genshin concludes, is equal to and no different from that gained from the act of charity itself. This again reflects the great importance that Genshin placed on the mental attitude with which one undertakes one's practice. As the examples above demonstrate, Genshin was quite flexible when it came to the question of practice. This attitude is based on his perception that different people have different spiritual abilities, and that each person should undertake the practice that he or she finds most appropriate. The important thing is not what particular kind of practice one engages in, but whether or not one engages in it with utmost sincerity. As long as it is done with sincerity, any virtuous act can serve as the cause for attaining birth in the pure land. And it is for this reason that Genshin, and it is for this person that Genshin places the greatest emphasis on the mental attitude with which one undertakes one's practice. With that, I'm going to go to the last page and read the concluding paragraph. So, to conclude, I have taken a look at two issues that Genshin takes up in the Ōjōyōshū, and none of them, I dare say, are things that are usually taken up in standard outlines or summaries of this text. But the Ōjōyōshū is a very long and very complex work, filled with, I would say, fascinating detours into complicated matters of doctrine, as well as highly practical problems confronting serious Pure Land believers. And for this reason, there are many issues in this text that have not received the attention that they deserve, despite the fact that numerous scholarly books and articles have been published on it. And in this sense, I think the Ōjōyōshū is a fascinating and alluring text, one still filled with problems and topics that have yet to be fully analyzed. And I hope that my talk has given you some idea of the interesting issues that are still hidden within the text, and I also hope that it will prompt you to look into it